next part of the sphenoid is the getter wings. There are two wings, lesser means smaller and getter means larger. These two getter wings of sphenoid on each side of the body of the sphenoid. Then what are the presenting parts of the getter wings? There are three surfaces and two borders. The three surfaces are, one is cerebral surface or upper surface, then this is orbital surface. This forms a part of the orbit. If you see this is orbit, this is getter wing of sphenoid. So the part below it forms the part of the orbit here. It is called lateral surface, and one projecting part between the lateral border and posterior border is called the spine of the sphenoid. Let us discuss the cerebral surface. In this surface, here you can see the getter wing of sphenoid. It is marked by the red margin. This is getter wing and this is lesser wing. Here you can see so many foramens, and these foramens from anterior to posterior. What are the foramens you can see in the getter wing? The anteriorly, this foramen is foramen rotundum, that is round shaped foramen, and behind it this large oval shaped foramen is the foramen ovale, and behind it close to the spine this foramen is the foramen spinosum. The name spinosum means because it is close to the spine of the sphenoid, so the name is foramen spinosum. Then what are the structures passing through the different foramens? To the foramen rotundum, maxillary nerve. To the foramen ovale, motor and sensory root of the mandibular nerve, lesser superficial petrosal nerve, anterior division of middle meningeal sinus, accessory meningeal artery and emissary vein. And structures passing through the foramen spinosum are the nervus spinosus. It is a meningeal branch of the trunk of mandibular nerve, then posterior division of the middle meningeal veins, anterior division passing through this ovale, posterior division passing through the foramen spinosum, and one artery is there called middle meningeal artery. Besides these three important foramen, sometimes other foramens you can see. One is canaliculus innominatus or foramen of Arnold, which is present between the foramen ovale and spinosum, but it is not there. And sometimes another foramen may be found between the ovale and the rotundum here. In this particular specimen, this is foramen of Vesely or emissary sphenoidal foramen. Through this foramen, the structures passing an emissary vein from the cavernous sinus. Usually, lesser superficial petrosal nerve passes through the foramen ovale, but sometimes it may pass through the canaliculus innominatus or foramen of Arnold. Then come to the lateral surface. This is lateral surface. This surface is divided by a crest. This crest is called infratemporal crest and divides this lateral surface into two parts. One is upper part, which forms the part of the temporal fossa, and the lower part here below the infratemporal crest. So it forms the roof of the infratemporal fossa, and the muscle attached to the upper part is the temporalis muscle, and this surface here, the muscle is the upper head of lateral pterygoid muscle, and here you will get the lower head of lateral pterygoid muscle. So the whole surface, here is the attachment of lateral pterygoid, upper head from the lower part of the lateral surface of the getter wing of sphenoid, and lower head from the lateral surface of the lateral pterygoid plate. Then come to the orbital part. This is orbital part or orbital surface, and it is having two articular borders and two non-articular borders. Two articular borders are upper border and lateral border. This is upper border, this is lateral border, and two non-articular border. There is a lower border and medial border. This medial border, it forms the lateral boundary of superior orbital fissure. This is superior orbital fissure. From this side you can see this is superior orbital fissure between the greater wing and lesser wing of sphenoid, and the lower non-articular border here, this forms the lateral boundary of infraorbital fissure. Here you can see this is infraorbital fissure of this side, this is infraorbital fissure of this side, and this is the orbital surface. This orbital surface, it forms the posterior part of the lateral wall of the orbit. This is lateral wall of orbit, this is anterior part, this is posterior part. The posterior part is contributed by the orbital surface of greater ring of sphenoid, and its lower border, this is a lower border, it forms the one of the boundary of the inferior orbital fissure. This is inferior orbital fissure between the maxilla and greater ring of sphenoid. One thing to be remembered, that greater ring of sphenoid and lesser ring of sphenoid, in between these two there is superior orbital fissure, but the infraorbital fissure, it is present between the lower border of the orbital surface of the greater ring of sphenoid and the maxilla. Structures passing through the superior orbital fissure, I told you while I was discussing the middle cranial fossa. And what are the structures passing through the inferior orbital fissure? Though it is not a fissure of the sphenoid, but in this connection you may remember the structures passing through the inferior orbital fissure. The main structure is the maxillary nerve. Other than this, there are zygomatic branch of maxillary nerve, infraorbital vessels, inferior ophthalmic vein, and orbital branch of sphenoparatine ganglia. Then come to the spine. What are the ligaments is attached spine of the sphenoid? Number 1, sphenomandibular ligament from the spine of sphenoid to the lingula of the mandibular foramen. Next is pterygospinous ligament from the spine of the sphenoid to the tubercle at the posterior border of the lateral pterygoid plate. And third one is the anterior ligament of malleus from the spine of sphenoid to anterior process of malleus. And one muscle is attached to the spine, that is origin of tensor veli palatini muscle from its medial surface. And the structures related to the spine, medially coratympany nerve and cartilaginous part of the auditory tube, and laterally the structure is the auriculotemporal nerve. And one applied question, sometimes it is asked, explain the manifestation of dry mouth and loss of taste sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue following fracture of the spine of the sphenoid. You know, the spine is related medially with the coratympany nerve and laterally with the auriculotemporal nerve. For the injury of the coratympany nerve, which carries the taste sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue, that will involve, so there will be loss of taste sensation from the corresponding half of the tongue. And for the damage of the auriculotemporal nerve, which is lateral to the spine, it produces dry mouth by intermingling the postganglionic parasympathetic pathway to the parotid gland. But it is to be remembered that all the three major salivary glands are affected because of the injury of the spine of the sphenoid. Then come to the lesser ring of sphenoid. This is lesser ring of sphenoid, and the presenting parts of this lesser ring are two borders, anterior border and posterior border, and two surfaces, superior surface and inferior surface. Here is one canal is there. Yes, this canal. It is formed between the body of the sphenoid and the two roots of lesser ring of sphenoid. This is anterior root, this is posterior root, and it is body of the sphenoid here. It forms the optic canal, and the structures passing through this canal is the optic nerve and ophthalmic artery. The artery lies inferolateral to the optic nerve, and the medial end of this posterior border of the lesser ring, it forms the anterior clinoid process. and here you will get the attachment of mainly three structures. One is anterior end of three margin of tetrorium cerebelli, then carotidoclinoid ligament, and one is interclinoid ligament extending between the anterior and posterior clinoid process. And this border is free. It forms the anterior boundary of the middle cranial fossa or posterior boundary of the anterior cranial fossa. And here lies one venous sinus called sphenoid sinus, and this border it is projecting into the lateral sulcus of the cerebral hemisphere. But the anterior border it articulates with the posterior border of orbital plate of frontal bone. Here it is already articulated. I am showing you the frontal bone. This is frontal bone. This is the orbital part. It is posterior border. This border articulates with the anterior border of lesser ring of sphenoid in this way, and this gap, here you will get the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. Next part is the pterygoid process. There are two pterygoid processes, one on each side, and each pterygoid process having two parts or two plates. Lateral pterygoid plate, this one, and medial pterygoid plate. These two plates anteriorly they are fused, but in the lower part there is a gap. This gap or fissure called pterygoid fissure, and this pterygoid fissure it articulates with the pyramidal process of the palatine bone, and posteriorly there is a fossa or depression. This is called pterygoid fossa, and at the upper end of the medial pterygoid plate there is another fossa is there called scaphoid fossa. The scaphoid fossa, here you will get the attachment one important muscle. That muscle is the origin of tensor veli palatini muscle. Each plate having one lateral surface, one medial surface. The medial pterygoid plate also having one lateral surface and one medial surface. Then what are the muscles attached to the lateral pterygoid plate? On the lateral surface, the lower head of the lateral pterygoid muscle. Upper head of lateral pterygoid is here. Medial pterygoid attached on the medial surface of lateral pterygoid. That means both the medial and lateral pterygoid muscles, they are originating from the lateral pterygoid plate. From the posterior border of the lateral pterygoid plate, there may be a projection or bony projection which is connected with the spine, pterygospinous ligament. Posterior border of the medial pterygoid plate, there is a hook-like bony projection. It is called pterygoid hamulus, and here there is one attachment pterygomandibular raphe. One end is the pterygoid hamulus and other end in the mandible, and over this hamulus the tensor veli palatini muscle glides. The tensor veli palatini originates here from the scaphoid fossa, and then it glides over the hamulus and go to the palate. There is one opening above the scaphoid fossa. This is scaphoid fossa. This is the opening. This opening is the pterygoid canal or opening of pterygoid canal, and the structures passing through this pterygoid canal is the nerve and artery of the pterygoid canal. The nerve of pterygoid canal, it is found by the union of two nerves. One is the greater superficial petrosal nerve, branch of facial nerve, and deep petrosal nerve, it is a sympathetic nerve plexus around the internal carotid artery. These two nerves form the nerve of pterygoid canal. Here is the position of the pterygopalatine fossa, this one. This is pterygoid process. If I show you this one, this is the maxilla posterior side. This is pterygoid plate or pterygoid process. This is pterygomaxillary fissure, and deep to it, this is the position of the pterygopalatine fossa. And that means from the anterior border of the pterygoid process, here you will get the pterygopalatine fossa. Laterally infratemporal fossa, this is pterygopalatine fossa. And if I rotate it and you see there are multiple foramens which are opening into the pterygopalatine fossa. what are this opening or what are the foramen in the upper part of the pterygoid fossa. From lateral to medial, this is one foramen. This foramen is the foramen rotundum. From this side, this foramen rotundum. You turn it, this is foramen rotundum. So lateral most foramen, foramen rotundum, then this foramen. This foramen is pterygoid canal. If you see from this side, this is pterygoid canal. This one, above this scaphoid fossa. I am passing the probe through the pterygoid canal, above the scaphoid fossa, this is scaphoid fossa, and you see from this side, you can see this is the opening of the pterygoid canal. This is foramen rotundum. Rotundum laterally, then it is the pterygoid canal, and more medially another foramen is there, this foramen. This is called palatovaginal canal. If I see from this side, here you will get the palatovaginal canal, this one. From this side, palatovaginal canal. So, in the pterygoid fossa, which is present over here, here you will get in the upper part 3 important foramen from lateral to medial side, foramen rotundum, pterygoid canal and palatovaginal canal. Lastly, I am highlighting only the important points regarding its ossification. The sphenoid bone, in terms of ossification, it is having two parts. One is pre-sphenoid part, one is post-sphenoid part. The body of the sphenoid anterior to the tuberculum celli. That means this is tuberculum celli. The anterior to it, including the lesser ring of sphenoid, this is the pre-sphenoid part. And behind it, that means the body of the sphenoid behind the tuberculum celli, which includes the sella turcica, dorsum celli, greater ring of sphenoid and the pterygoid process. All these things are the post-sphenoidal part, and there are 6 centers of ossification for the pre-sphenoid part and 8 centers of ossification, because it is the larger part, 8 centers of ossification. And what type of bone this sphenoid? According to ossification, it is a membrano-cartilaginous bone. That means some part of it, of this bone, it is membranous in ossification and some part it cartilaginous in ossification. The lateral part of the greater ring of sphenoid and pterygoid process, they are ossified in membrane, and the rest of the bone, they are ossified in cartilage. Lastly, how to hold the bone in anatomical position. You have to hold the bone in such a way so that the anterior border with ethmoidal spine of the body is directed forward. Sella turcica will be on the superior surface of the body. 2 pterygoid process, they are projecting downwards, and 2 wings, greater wings, sideways. So you have to hold the bone in this way. This is the anatomical position of sphenoid. This is another sphenoid bone you have to hold by your both hands in the midline.